The smell of fresh linen clung to the air, a scent that was meant to be comforting. But in that moment, it felt suffocating. Blood pooled beneath Daniel's lifeless body, soaking into the crisp white sheets of his mistress's bed. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, his eyes wide open, locked in a final, horrified gaze. The room was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the heavy rain that hammered against the windows, as though nature itself was mourning the events that had unfolded within these walls. Detective Olivia Hayes stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping across the scene with the professionalism she had honed over the years. She didn't flinch at the sight of the body. This was her job and she was good at it. But there was something about this case that gnawed at her. Something wasn't right. His body lay on his mistress's bed. But the strange thing was, neither the mistress nor his wife had any idea the other existed. As Olivia moved closer to the body, her mind raced. Who would want Daniel dead? What had happened here? And why was it that both women, his wife, Claire, and his mistress, Jessica, claimed to have never met each other? It all began hours earlier when Olivia received the call. Detective Hayes, the officer had said, his voice tinged with urgency. We've got a crime scene. Daniel Thompson, age 37, found murdered in a residential apartment. The odd thing is, his wife and mistress are both claiming they had no idea about each other. It wasn't unusual to hear of cheaters and their tangled webs, but something about the case made Olivia's instincts flare. She'd seen this before: murder under the guise of betrayal, secrets hiding darker truths. She wasn't going to let this one slip away. Olivia arrived at the apartment building and made her way up to the third floor, where the crime scene was. She entered the room, the door slightly ajar, and immediately felt the weight of the situation. The victim was sprawled across the bed, and the room had been meticulously arranged, as if someone had tried to make it appear normal before the inevitable chaos of the discovery. The sheets were crisp white, almost too pristine for a room that held such a violent death. She glanced at the two women who were sitting on opposite sides of the room, looking like polar opposites. One was older, wearing a sharp, tailored suit that screamed of wealth and status. The other was younger, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with shock. Claire, the wife, looked almost too composed, her hands folded in her lap. Jessica, the mistress, was visibly trembling, her lip quivering as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Both women locked eyes with Olivia as she stepped into the room. The tension between them was palpable. Detective Hayes? Claire spoke first, her voice smooth but tinged with an edge of worry. I don't understand. My husband, why would anyone want to harm him? Olivia turned to face her, sizing her up. Tell me where you were tonight, Mrs. Thompson. Claire's expression remained unchanged, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? It was hard to tell. I was at home alone. I've been waiting for Daniel to come back. I had no idea he was here. Olivia could tell there was more to the story. What time did he leave? Claire glanced at the clock. Around 6 p.m. He said he had a work meeting. And you didn't think it odd that he didn't come home? Claire shook her head. Not at all. He often works late. It's part of his job. Olivia wasn't convinced. There was a certain chill in the way Claire spoke. The perfect wife? Or the perfect liar? She turned to Jessica next. The younger woman was visibly distraught, her hands shaking as she clutched the hem of her shirt. I didn't do it. I swear, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Tell me what happened tonight, Ms. Olivia paused, glancing at the paperwork in her hand. Jessica, right? Yeah, Jessica, she stammered, her eyes darting nervously between Olivia and the lifeless body of Daniel. I don't know what happened. I woke up and he was like this. Olivia stepped closer to the bed, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face. You didn't hear anything? No sounds? No struggles? Jessica's face crumpled as if the weight of the situation was too much for her to bear. I don't remember. I mean, I heard something, but I thought it was just the storm. It was raining so hard. The noise, it sounded like someone banging on the door, but I didn't get up. I was sleeping. When I finally woke up, he was dead. Olivia narrowed her eyes, sensing the cracks in Jessica's story. And you didn't think to call anyone? Not even the police? Jessica bit her lip, looking guilty. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I thought maybe he was just unconscious or hurt, but then I saw the blood. And I couldn't breathe. I didn't know who to call. I couldn't even think straight. Who was supposed to know about this? Olivia asked, crossing her arms. Who did he tell about his other life? I don't know. Jessica cried, her voice breaking. He told me he was going to leave his wife. He promised, but he was always so so distant. He never talked about her much, but I thought he was serious. He even said he was going to tell her about me tonight. He was supposed to come over, but when I called him, there was no answer. I thought maybe he was busy or just running late, but I never imagined this. Olivia didn't let the vulnerability in Jessica's voice sway her. There was something off about this whole scene, and she wasn't buying the story just yet. She turned back to Claire, who was still sitting rigidly on the couch, watching the interrogation unfold with unnerving calmness. You said Daniel left at 6. How did you feel about him coming home so late? Claire's lips tightened slightly. As I said, it wasn't unusual. We've been married for almost 10 years, detective. I'm used to his schedule. You didn't suspect anything? Olivia pressed. That your husband might be somewhere else? Claire's eyes flickered, but she quickly regained control. I trust my husband. And I'm sure he had a valid reason for being late. If you're implying something else, you're mistaken. Olivia didn't miss the small twitch in Claire's hand as she reached for the glass of water on the side table. Her fingers were slightly trembling. But it was the way her eyes flicked to the door as if hoping for an escape that made Olivia pause. Was she hiding something? Or was she just a woman in shock? After a long silence, Olivia stepped away from both women, pacing around the room, her mind trying to piece the puzzle together. The apartment felt like it had its own stories to tell, if only it could speak. The soft rustling of the sheets, the faint scent of perfume in the air, and the blood staining the once pristine bed were all clues, but they didn't fit together yet. I want to talk to both of you separately, Olivia said, her voice firm. There's something off about this. Both of you are saying you've never met, but I know there's more going on here. The truth is somewhere in this room. And I intend to find it. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of the apartment Olivia had just left behind. She sat across from Claire first, her eyes never leaving the woman who sat before her, composed and still as a statue. Claire's hands were folded neatly in her lap, but there was a tightness in her jaw, a certain restraint to her every movement that spoke volumes. Let's start over, Olivia said, leaning forward slightly. You're telling me that you didn't know Daniel was seeing another woman, yet you were married to him for years? You never suspected anything? Claire met her gaze, unwavering. No, detective. I had no reason to suspect. But when did you last see him? Before you found out he was dead, I mean. Claire's voice faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I spoke to him earlier this afternoon. He was fine. He said he'd be home around 8 or 9. But he never showed up. You didn't try calling him? I did. A few times. But it went straight to voicemail. Claire's face hardened slightly. I told you I trust my husband. He's never given me a reason to doubt him. Olivia nodded slowly. And when you got here and found out he was dead, how did you feel? Devastated, Claire whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. My world, it shattered. Olivia studied her for a long moment, watching the subtle shifts in her demeanor. There was a lot that Claire wasn't saying, but she wasn't quite ready to confront her with that. Not yet. I'm going to speak with the other woman now, Olivia said, standing up. I'll be back soon. Jessica was waiting for her, her hands wringing the hem of her shirt again. She hadn't been crying, but there was a certain fragility about her that Olivia couldn't ignore. It was as if she was on the verge of breaking, but just holding it together long enough to get through this. Jessica, Olivia began, sitting across from her, I know this is hard. But I need you to be honest with me. You said Daniel was going to leave his wife tonight. Did he mention anything specific? Any reason why tonight? Jessica shook her head. No, he didn't. He just said he was going to tell her. That's all. Tell her what? Olivia asked, leaning forward. What was he planning to tell her? Jessica hesitated. He said he didn't love her anymore. That he was falling out of love with her. He wanted to start over with me. And that's all? That's all. He didn't give me any more details. But when I called him earlier tonight and he didn't answer, I started to get worried. I thought maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he was too scared to face her. Olivia didn't believe that for a second. There was more to the story and she was going to get to the bottom of it. I think I'm done here for now, Olivia said, standing up again. I'll need both of you to stay here. I'm not finished. Back at the precinct, Olivia pored over the evidence. The room felt heavy with silence as she sifted through Daniel's financial records, his phone records, and any other scrap of information that could help her piece together the mystery. There was something she was missing, something crucial. Her eyes landed on one detail. Daniel had a life insurance policy. A big one. And it had been updated just a month ago. The beneficiary? His wife Claire. But there was something else. The policy had a clause that stated if he died in an act of infidelity, the payout would go to the other party involved, meaning Jessica. Olivia's stomach tightened as the pieces started to fall into place. One of these women had something to gain from Daniel's death. But which one? As she turned back to the case files, a small text message caught her eye. It was from Daniel's phone, sent late at night, just hours before his death. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I've made my choice." It was unclear who it was meant for. But Olivia knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. And she wasn't about to let either woman get away with murder. The investigation had hit a wall. Every thread that Olivia tugged it seemed to unravel just a little too neatly, as though someone had been expecting her to pull it. It all pointed toward the two women, Claire and Jessica. One of them was hiding the truth, but which one? Back in the interrogation room, Olivia studied the faces of the two women. They sat across from each other, separated by the thick glass, with officers standing guard. Neither spoke and neither seemed eager to share more. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Olivia knew she had to push them, but she also had to be careful. They were both smart in their own ways, and a wrong move might cause them to close up completely. Olivia started with Claire. "You said you trust your husband," she began, leaning forward slightly. "But how well did you really know him? And how well did he know you? Because, according to his phone records, he was planning on telling you something tonight. Something important." Claire's eyes flickered, betraying the calm composure she'd so carefully maintained up until now. I don't know what you're talking about." Olivia didn't miss a beat. "Daniel was going to leave you. He was planning on being with Jessica. Did you know that?" Claire's face hardened. "That's a lie. My husband would never." "Then why did he update his life insurance policy just a month ago? With a clause that explicitly states that if he died in an affair, the payout would go to the mistress? Did you know that?" Claire's breath caught in her throat, her grip on the edge of the table tightening. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Olivia leaned back, watching her closely. "I've seen the records. He was planning on telling you tonight, Claire. What did you think he was going to say to you?" Claire didn't respond at first. Her eyes stared down at the table, her lips pressed into a tight line. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. I thought we could fix things. But he was already gone." Olivia stayed silent, letting the words hang in the air. She could tell Claire wasn't telling her everything. But there was something else now, guilt, maybe, or grief that was just beginning to show. Turning her attention to Jessica, Olivia repeated the same questions. "Jessica, what about you? Did you know he was going to leave his wife? What did he tell you?" Jessica swallowed hard, her voice small. He told me he was going to tell her tonight. That he couldn't keep living a lie. He loved me, detective. He promised me." "Promise?" Olivia repeated softly, almost to herself. She looked at Jessica's eyes, searching for a hint of something more. "And you really had no idea he had this policy? That he would leave everything to you if something happened?" I didn't know," Jessica replied, her voice shaking. "I swear. I wasn't thinking about money. I loved him. And you think Claire wasn't suspicious about his behavior? That's a hell of a thing to overlook, don't you think?" Jessica's eyes welled up with tears. "I didn't want this. I didn't want him to die. I just wanted him to be mine, to be with me. I thought we could be happy." Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Both women had their stories, but neither of them seemed entirely innocent. There was something lurking behind their words. Something they weren't saying. It wasn't long before Olivia got a breakthrough. One of the officers had managed to get a hold of the security footage from the building's hallway. Olivia had been hoping for some sort of clue, some sign of who had entered the apartment building that night. But what they found wasn't just a clue, it was a bombshell. The footage showed Claire arriving at the apartment complex just after 9 p.m., a few hours after Daniel had been killed. She stood outside the door, her hand hovering over the knob as if she were contemplating something. After a brief hesitation, she entered the building, walking with the same calm but tense demeanor she had shown earlier. But it wasn't Claire's presence that stood out. It was the figure that entered the building just moments before her. It was Daniel. Alive. Or at least it seemed that way at first. The footage revealed Daniel's silhouette, walking toward the elevator, his phone in hand. He wasn't acting suspicious, nor did he seem like he was in danger. He was fine. Olivia watched the footage again, rewinding and pausing at certain frames, trying to make sense of it. How could this be? Daniel was dead. The blood on the bed had been real. There was no denying that. The problem was, if Daniel was in the apartment building before his death, then who was the body that lay on the bed in the room with Jessica? Was it Daniel? Or someone else? Later that evening, Olivia gathered both women for another round of questioning. She sat across from them, the tension in the room palpable. "I've seen the security footage," Olivia said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying authority. "Claire, you entered the building after 9 p.m., the same time Daniel was supposedly dead. Can you explain that?" Claire's face didn't show any immediate reaction, but Olivia could see her composure falter. She looked from Olivia to Jessica, then back again. "I went there because I wanted to find out the truth," Claire said quietly, her voice steady but guarded. "I knew something was wrong. I thought maybe he had gone there to see her." "Are you telling me you didn't see his body? Didn't notice the blood?" Olivia pressed. Claire remained silent for a moment, her lips trembling. "I didn't know what I'd find. I didn't want to believe it. But when I got there, the door was unlocked. I saw her. Jessica." At the mention of her name, Jessica's eyes snapped up. "What do you mean you saw me? I didn't see you. I swear." Olivia stood up and placed her hands on the table. "Something doesn't add up here. I'm going to tell you both something, and I need you to be honest with me. The man you both think you loved, the man you both thought you knew, he wasn't the man you thought he was." Both women looked at Olivia, confusion in their eyes. "I've seen the footage and I've gathered all the evidence. The man who you thought you knew, he was living a double life. But not just with you two. He was running from someone else. Someone much more dangerous." Claire and Jessica exchanged wary glances, their confusion growing. Olivia reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a file. "There's one last thing. Daniel's real name wasn't Daniel Thompson. His identity was stolen years ago, and the man you were both seeing wasn't who he claimed to be. And that's the truth that's going to lead us to the killer. Not the love triangle you think you're caught in." Claire's eyes widened, the weight of Olivia's words sinking in. "Wait, you're saying he wasn't really?" "No," Olivia replied, her gaze steady. "And the man who killed him? He knew that. He knew who Daniel really was and he was coming after him. He used you both as pawns in a game you didn't even know you were playing." As the realization hit both women, the room fell into a heavy silence. This wasn't just a case of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge. This was a case of stolen identities, dangerous secrets, and a web of lies that none of them could have predicted. Olivia wasn't done yet. She still had to find out who had been hunting Daniel all along. But one thing was clear now: whoever killed Daniel, they were far closer to him than anyone had guessed. Olivia could feel the weight of the room pressing in on her. The silence hung heavy between Claire and Jessica, their minds clearly racing as they tried to process everything Olivia had just laid out before them. It wasn't just a case of infidelity anymore. It wasn't just about betrayal, love, or greed. This was much bigger than any of them had anticipated. Who was he really?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who was Daniel?" Olivia didn't answer immediately. She needed to keep the pressure on. There was still so much to untangle. "I'm not going to tell you everything just yet," she said, her voice firm. "But I will tell you this. The man you knew as Daniel Thompson wasn't the man who had been living in that apartment. His real name, the one he was running from, was something completely different. And it's that name, the name he kept hidden, that's going to lead us to the truth." Jessica stared at Olivia, her eyes wide with shock. "You mean, he wasn't really Daniel?" "No," Olivia said, shaking her head. "That wasn't his real identity. And you weren't the only ones he was deceiving. There's someone else involved in this. Someone who's been watching him. Someone who knows the truth. And they're the ones who killed him." The room fell into a tense stillness. Claire's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "You're telling me that Daniel, that man who I loved, he was running from someone? From his past?" Olivia nodded slowly. "Yes. And I believe the person who killed him knew exactly who he was. They knew about the stolen identity, the secrets, and they were coming for him." The pieces were falling into place, but Olivia could sense that both women were too shaken to offer any more substantial information at this moment. They needed time to process, to come to terms with the revelations that were unfolding. "I'm going to need both of you to stay here for now," Olivia said, standing up. "I'm not finished. I'll be back." As Olivia left the interrogation room, her mind was working overtime. She needed more answers, more clues. Daniel Thompson, or whatever his real name was, had been living in hiding and someone had been searching for him. But who? What? Olivia returned to the precinct, where she was greeted by her partner, Detective Marcus Green. He had been working on the other aspects of the case while she focused on the women. Anything new? Olivia asked, not bothering with small talk. Actually, yeah, Marcus said, his tone serious. We got a hit on Daniel's real name. Turns out he was linked to a notorious crime syndicate. A long time ago. It looks like he faked his own death to escape them. Olivia's heart raced. A crime syndicate? What are you talking about? Marcus nodded. I did some digging and it seems that Daniel, or whatever his real name is, was involved in some pretty heavy stuff. Money laundering, fraud, even racketeering. It all goes back to this guy named Anton Demetriou, a big player in organized crime. Daniel was part of his crew, but he disappeared years ago. We couldn't find any trace of him until now. So, Daniel Thompson wasn't just hiding from his wife and mistress, Olivia muttered, thinking out loud. He was running from someone much more dangerous. This Anton Demetriou guy, did he know Daniel was still alive? Marcus's eyes darkened. He sure as hell knows now. We traced a call that was made to a burner phone found in Daniel's apartment. The call came from someone connected to Demetriou's organization. It's a message, Olivia. A warning? Olivia's mind was spinning. This case was no longer just about two women caught in a deadly love triangle. It was about a man who had built a false life, a man who had fled a past so dark it threatened to swallow him whole. And now that past was coming for him. And by extension, it was coming for everyone around him. Back at the apartment, Olivia was once again standing in the room where Daniel had been found dead. She stared at the bloodstains on the bed, her thoughts racing. The evidence seemed to point to two possibilities. Either one of the women had killed him out of jealousy or rage, or someone else had been involved. Someone from Daniel's past. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. She turned to Jessica and Claire, who were both still sitting in the waiting room, looking more exhausted by the hour. It had been a long night, but Olivia had a feeling the morning would bring something new. All right, Olivia said, taking a deep breath as she approached them. I'm going to be blunt with you both. I've learned that Daniel wasn't who you thought he was. He was involved with some dangerous people, and those people are still looking for him. One of you is lying to me, and I need the truth, now. Claire's face tightened, and Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For a moment, it seemed like neither of them was going to say anything. But then Claire spoke up. You don't understand. We've been through this before. Daniel wasn't a good man. He was always lying, always hiding something. He told me he was leaving me. But then he didn't come home. I thought he changed his mind. But I never imagined this. Jessica looked up, her voice raw. He promised me, detective. He promised me he would leave her. He told me he loved me. But now he's dead and I don't even know why. Why would anyone kill him? Olivia shook her head slowly. Someone knew Daniel was still alive. And they're still looking for him. I need to know if either of you had any contact with anyone who might be involved in his past. Maybe someone from his work, someone you don't know about. Maybe someone who has something to gain from his death? The silence stretched long. Then Claire's voice broke the stillness. I did get a call last week, she said, her voice hesitant. It was a man. He asked me about Daniel. I thought it was a wrong number or maybe someone trying to sell me something, but he seemed to know a lot about us. About our life together. Olivia leaned forward, her pulse quickening. What did he say? Claire hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. He said something about unfinished business? That Daniel owed him. And that if he didn't pay up, there would be consequences. Jessica's eyes widened. That's not possible. Daniel never mentioned anyone like that. I think it's time we find out who this man is, Olivia said, her voice low and urgent. You're both in danger now. And the only way to protect you is to get to the bottom of this. Back at the precinct, Olivia was piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle. The phone call Claire had received, the connection to Anton Demetriou's organization, and the evidence pointing to a much larger conspiracy, it was all starting to fall into place. But the real question was, who had killed Daniel and why? With the clock ticking, Olivia knew she was running out of time. The killer was out there, and the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. But one thing was certain, someone was watching. Someone who wasn't done with Daniel just yet. The pieces were finally falling into place. Olivia sat in her office, reviewing everything she had uncovered. Daniel, or whatever his real name was, had been running from his past, hiding under a stolen identity, and deceiving everyone in his life. His wife, his mistress, even the police had been caught in the web of lies he had spun. But now the truth was clear. Daniel had been murdered not out of passion or jealousy, but as a final reckoning for the life he had tried to escape. The breakthrough came when Olivia's partner, Marcus, tracked down the caller who had threatened Claire. It was a man named Vincent Moretti, a known enforcer for Anton Demetriou's syndicate. When they finally caught up to him, Vincent didn't bother denying it. "I warned him," Vincent said with a smirk as he sat across from Olivia in the interrogation room. "I told him he couldn't just disappear. You don't steal from people like Anton and expect to live happily ever after." Olivia leaned forward. "So you killed him?" Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, I didn't have to. Someone else beat me to it." That answer sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. If it wasn't Vincent, then who? That night, as Olivia replayed the events in her mind, she thought about the way Claire and Jessica had reacted during questioning. Jessica had seemed genuinely shocked by Daniel's death. Claire had been angry, betrayed, devastated. Digging deeper into Claire's records, Olivia found something she hadn't expected: financial transactions that linked her to a private investigator. A man who specialized in tracking down people who didn't want to be found. Claire had known about Daniel's secret long before he planned to leave her. Olivia had her brought in one last time. Sitting across from Claire in the interrogation room, she laid out the truth. "You hired someone to track him, didn't you?" Olivia said. "You knew something was off and you wanted to know what he was hiding?" Claire's face remained calm, but her eyes flickered with something Olivia recognized: guilt. "You found out he wasn't really Daniel Thompson," Olivia continued. "You found out he was running from something. But instead of confronting him, you set a trap. You leaked his whereabouts to the very people he was hiding from, didn't you?" Claire exhaled sharply, her shoulders slumping. "I just wanted him to pay," she whispered. "For everything. For lying to me. For making a fool of me. I wanted him to suffer, to know what it felt like to be powerless. But I never thought they'd actually kill him. I swear I didn't." But Olivia knew better. Claire had given the information to the wrong people, and they had done what she couldn't bring herself to do. In the end, it wasn't the mistress or the wife who had directly killed Daniel. It was his own past catching up with him. As Claire was arrested for conspiracy in his murder, Olivia felt a strange sense of finality. Jessica was released, shaken but free to move on. And Daniel, or whoever he had once been, had finally met the fate he had spent years trying to outrun. Some secrets, Olivia realized, never stay buried. And when you live a life built on lies, the truth will always find you in the end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by liking this video, share and subscribe to our channel. Also turn on the post notification bell so that you will be notified each time we post a story.